So I'd like to talk about how the entire medical system is corrupt. It's full of corrupt people behaving in a corrupt manner. How could this possibly be? Well, my theory is that it started a long time ago with the selection process of a medical profession that encourages repetition. Doctors learn by rote rather than having to analyze a situation. That was the beginning, but that wasn't the real problem. Penicillin is where the corruption really began. And I think that this is how it happened. Everybody who made it through high school science knows that antibiotics, penicillin, breed superbugs. Alexander Fleming, in his Nobel Prize-winning speech, explained that these things, antibiotics, must be used judiciously because they absolutely will result in antibiotic resistance. It's inevitable. So you can use it for extreme cases, but it should be reserved because otherwise you will have bacteria that are harder and harder to eradicate. Okay, this is no secret. Anybody who made it through medical school, high school basic science 101, they know that. And yet you see doctors prescribing antibiotics for everything. People get a flu, a virus, and antibiotics are no good against a virus. Everybody knows that. And they prescribe them anyway. And they rationalize it by saying, oh, well, you could get secondary infections. So therefore, no, that's not a worthwhile benefit to taking that kind of risk. I mean, it's not good for society. It's not even good for the person, but they do it anyway. Why do they do it? Well, I believe that once the public was aware that they could get this miracle drug, they demanded it. And if they couldn't get it from Dr. Jones, they'd go down to see Dr. Smith, who would give it to them. So market pressure dictated that if Dr. Jones wasn't amenable to giving out something that he knew was wrong, he'd be weeded out of the system. The patient would badmouth him, he'd lose the business, other people would not be referred to him. So over time, this created a situation where the doctors that were easily corruptible became dominant. And once they're in a system where corruption is the norm, it becomes mass formation psychosis. You've already accepted the premise that you're in a profession that has to behave in a somewhat corrupt way. You cannot exercise pure scientific integrity because you cannot survive in that environment. So once a doctor has to move in this milieu, this environment where a certain level of corruption is the norm, that lends itself to being corrupted in other realms as well. They see a test that's not quite right. They know it's not quite right, but it's not the medical standard. It's not the standard of care. So they can't stand up for it. So they've accepted this climate of corruption and they can't break out of it. The few who try, they're destroyed. So people wonder why doctors are not the ones who step up in any emergency. If there's pollution in the water, if there's endocrine receptor disruptors affecting the fish, if there's glyphosate seemingly affecting food reactivities, making people sick, it doesn't seem to be the doctors who step up to do anything about it. Why is that? It's always some advocate like Erin Brockovich, but not a doctor. Well, it's because they know that they'll be weeded out. Market pressure and the standard of care being exerted by their colleagues means they cannot do it. So that's my reasoning for how the entire medical profession became corrupted, stays corrupted, and cannot be expected to exercise pure integrity when a new challenge comes along, because that trait has been deselected out of the profession.
It sounds like the profession has started a race to the bottom.
Absolutely. Instead of the frontline soldiers in the war on disease, they've become the apologists, the ones that step back and wait for somebody else to do it.
So it's like the doctors who have the least amount of integrity, who are the most desperate for business. Well, if this doctor won't prescribe that, don't worry, I'll get it for you. I won't be the one to hold the line and say, you know what? We don't know if you actually have a bacterial infection. Could be a virus, could be a fungal infection. Why don't you get some fresh air, ride it out, see how you're feeling? Instead, they're so hungry for business that they're like, we don't care if we create antibiotic resistance. Come over here, James. Dr. So-and-so will write you this prescription. And in that way, the people who are desperate for what? More patients, more money, a busier practice, more status. They're really, really starting a race to the bottom in all of medicine. Not just with this one thing, because I'm sure they're doing it with other areas.
Yeah, and this is a glaring example, but they do it in subtle ways. Like during chronic fatigue syndrome, the crux of the matter was an Epstein-Barr virus serology test, which showed an aberrant fluctuating pattern of EBV reactivation. Now, it was commonly known, everybody knows that adults aren't supposed to get the teenage kissing disease. I mean, that in the 1980s, that was nearly unheard of. And then all of a sudden it became routine and common, and nobody knows why. And this was unveiled by that new EBV serology test that was released in 1985. And finally, doctors could see something was wrong. These adults should not be getting sick this way. They shouldn't be getting EBV and staying sick, the chronic mononucleosis. And yet they were. So the few that tried to speak up about it, they were crushed by the competition. The doctors were saying, well, EBV is just a common virus, so just take better care of yourself. And the sheer shock value of this abnormality creeping through society was buried by the majority of corrupt doctors who simply normalized it.
Yeah, and we still see that in the patient community. People are wildly and loudly declaring, oh, I have reactivated EBV and that's why I'm not better. None of their doctors, even to this point, have said, or you have a failing immune system from some other cause. We should figure that out.
Exactly. And you can look at the doctors that did try to practice integrity, and they couldn't last in this environment. The corrupt ones, they have more money, they self-publicize, they've got the faith, the trust of a larger amount of people, and the patients work against the doctors that try to speak up and say, this isn't right and we need to do something.
That is such an interesting point, because anytime you try to say like, hey, look, this is actually negligence on behalf of this doctor, A, B, and C, here's the history. Instead of thinking about the history and how that doctor actually maybe caused way more problems with the choices and actions that they took, they take the side of the doctor. Dr. So-and-so helped me with A and B. How dare you say this about them? Well, if Dr. So-and-so kept their mouth shut about A and B 20 years ago and 50,000 people died as a result, is that a hero or a villain? Can you tell me? Sorry, I'm yelling, but this makes me really mad.
Yeah, and people should be mad because the corruption is systemic and there's no mechanism to stop it.